The spring of 1887 came cruel and wet. For 3 weeks the storms rolled across the plains, drumming on rooftops, swelling the rivers, and turning wagon roads into rivers of mud. Farmers prayed for a break, but the clouds only grew darker. By the 4th week, the rain wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a danger. Whole homesteads were washed away, fences torn down, and cattle driven into the gullies by rushing water. And somewhere out in that rain, she had been left, cold, forgotten, and soaked through to the bone. No one in the town could quite say why or how it had happened. Some whispered she had run from a wagon train and collapsed along the trail. Others claimed she'd been driven out by cruel hands, punished for something no one dared name. All anyone knew was that she was out there, in the storm, and that no one had gone after her. But one man had heard. The mountain man had been riding the ridge at dusk when he saw her. A small figure, hunched beneath a dying cottonwood, her dress plastered to her skin, her arms wrapped tight as if to hold herself together. Rain hammered down around her. Her lips moved, but the storm swallowed her voice. He didn't think. He swung from his saddle and dropped to the mud, his boots sinking deep. The world seemed nothing but water and wind, but in the middle of it, she sat shivering, as if the storm itself had chosen her to break. He pulled his coat from his shoulders, thick and heavy with wear, and draped it over her. She gasped at the sudden warmth, at the weight of it. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she wasn't alone. And that, in a season when the storms seemed endless, was enough to keep her alive. The rain did not ease when he found her. If anything, it seemed to pour harder, as though the heavens resented his interruption. The sky cracked with thunder, and every gust of wind drove the cold deeper into her bones. She tried to speak, but her teeth rattled too hard for words. He crouched low, his face close to hers, and for the first time he saw her eyes, wide, pale, and frightened, like a deer cornered by hounds. She flinched at his presence, uncertain whether he was friend or foe. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice a low rumble meant to cut through the storm. "You'll freeze if you stay here." Her lips parted, but no answer came, only a faint, shuddering breath. He knelt beside her and shifted the coat more snugly around her frame, pulling it tight under her chin. It swallowed her whole, the wool hanging heavy with rain, but it held his warmth, and that was something. When he slid an arm beneath her, she tensed, her thin fingers clutching at the mud, as though to anchor herself to the earth. He stilled, patient, waiting for her resistance to fade. "It's a mile to my camp," he said. "There's fire there, food. I won't ask questions, not tonight." Her eyes darted to his face, searching for a lie. The rain plastered his dark hair to his brow, carved rivulets down the planes of his jaw. Whatever she saw in him, it was enough. Her hands slackened, and she let him lift her. She weighed next to nothing, a bundle of bones and soaked cloth, trembling against his chest. He carried her to his horse, the mud sucking at his boots with every step. The animal shifted uneasily, snorting as the rain lashed at its flanks, but it stood steady as he swung her up onto the saddle. He climbed up behind her, holding her steady against him. She sagged into his chest, too weak to resist, too weary to question. The trail ahead was a ribbon of black mud and standing water, the storm unrelenting. But the mountain man urged his horse forward, each step carrying them farther from the place she'd been left, a place of abandonment, cold, and silence. And though the rain drowned the all around them, though the storm pressed against every mile, she was no longer shivering alone. The trail was little more than a scar cut into the hillside, washed slick with the storm. Water rushed down the slopes in thin silver streams, and each step of the horse seemed one slip away from disaster. But the mountain man kept his hold tight, his arm steady around the girl to keep her from pitching forward into the mud. She was light against him, frighteningly so. Every tremor of her body pressed through the sodden wool of his coat into his chest, and he could feel the slow, faltering rhythm of her breaths. He spoke now and again, not because he expected an answer, but because the sound of his voice seemed to keep her tethered. "Don't close your eyes," he told her once, leaning close so she could hear through the downpour. "I know you're tired. I know. But we've got a fire waiting. Stay with me a little longer." Her head lolled, then lifted, her cheek brushing his jaw. He thought he heard the faintest sound, not words, but a hum, the ghost of breath shaped into something. "What's that?" he asked, though the storm swallowed any reply. The horse pushed onward, hooves splashing through swollen rivulets that cut across the path. His own clothes were soaked clean through, the rain biting like knives, but he shifted his coat to shield her as much as possible. From time to time he glanced down at her face. Her skin was pale, lips nearly blue, lashes heavy with water, yet her eyes fluttered open now and again, catching him with that hollow, pleading look. He wished he had words to offer her comfort, but words were poor things against hunger and cold. At last the trees parted, giving way to a small clearing. The mountain man's camp lay at its center, a lean-to of rough-hewn logs, a canvas stretched tight to keep out the rain, and a circle of stones where he'd left the fire smoldering beneath a canopy of pine. Relief stirred in him as he swung down from the saddle. With care he lifted her again, cradling her close as he crossed the clearing. The embers in the fire pit glowed faint and angry, nearly smothered by damp air, but alive. He laid her gently on a folded blanket beside it, then crouched low, striking flint and steel until sparks caught. A flame bloomed, small but steady, feeding on the dry kindling he'd stored beneath the logs. He coaxed it higher, shielding it with his body against the draft. Soon a blaze roared in the pit, throwing light against the walls of the lean-to, warming the air with its crackle. She stirred, her hand twitching against the blanket. He shrugged off his coat at last, spreading it over her. Then he poured water from his canteen into a tin cup, warming it over the fire before holding it to her lips. "Drink slow," he murmured. "Easy now." She obeyed in tiny sips, each swallow weak but determined. When she'd had enough, she pulled back, her lips trembling as though she meant to speak. He leaned close again, waiting. "Why?" Her voice was a rasp, rough as broken reeds. "Why'd you stop?" The question caught him off guard. He sat back on his heels, studying her pale face in the firelight. "Couldn't leave you," he said simply. Her gaze searched his, doubtful, as though the notion of being saved was foreign to her. But exhaustion claimed her before she could press further. Her eyes closed, her breathing steadied into shallow, uneven pulls, and she drifted somewhere between sleep and survival. The mountain man remained by the fire, feeding it, listening to the storm rage just beyond the clearing. His eyes strayed often to her frail form beneath his coat. He did not know her name, nor why she had been left in the rain. But he knew this much. Someone had chosen to abandon her. And in that choice, in the cruelty of it, they had made her his responsibility now. The storm beat against the canvas, but the fire did not falter, and through the long hours of that night, neither did he. The fire held through the night, glowing like a stubborn heart in the center of the lean-to. The storm outside raged on, drumming on canvas and tearing at the pines, but within the circle of heat, the mountain man kept his vigil. He dozed only in fragments, head nodding, hand resting near the rifle propped by his side. Every crack of a branch in the storm drew his eyes open again, scanning the dark beyond the clearing, but nothing came. No rider, no pursuer, only the endless voice of the rain. Toward dawn, the wind broke at last. The silence that followed was almost startling, heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons from the fire, carrying the scent of charred wood. The girl stirred. A cough racked her thin body, sharp and weak, pulling him to her side at once. He steadied her, holding the cup again, this time filled with broth he had brewed from the jerky and herbs in his stores. "Try," he urged. "It ain't much, but it'll sit warm in your belly." Her lips parted, and with effort she drank. More than before. Her throat worked as she swallowed, and though each sip seemed a struggle, she did not refuse it. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. Her eyes opened fully now, and in the glow of the firelight, he saw the shadows under them, shadows that spoke of long days without rest, without safety. For a time, she only looked at him, as if weighing whether he was real. "You carried me," she whispered, her voice low and raw. "Aye." His tone was plain, without flourish. "Figured you wouldn't make it else." Her gaze dropped to the blanket, to the coat wrapped around her shoulders. She drew it tighter, as if the memory of the rain still clung to her skin. "They left me," she said after a long silence. The mountain man said nothing. He did not press. Instead, he reached for the fire, shifting a log so the flames licked higher, pilling more warmth into the shelter. "Rest easy," he told her. "Talk can wait." But she shook her head, stubbornness sparking in her weary eyes. "If I don't tell it, you won't understand." He studied her, then gave a slow nod. She swallowed, wincing at the effort. "It was my singing. That's what they said. Said it brought bad luck. Said it was the devil's sound in a woman's throat after dark." Her voice broke, thin as the wind outside. The mountain man's brow furrowed. Superstition. Fear dressed up as judgment. He'd seen such things before in frontier towns. Small minds grasping at shadows, punishing what they did not understand. "They whipped me for it," she added, pulling at the collar of her dress. Beneath the firelight, he saw the faint welts, the bruises, not yet faded. His jaw tightened. His hand hovered near the cup, though he did not speak. "And then," she whispered, "they left me there in the rain. Said, if the night wanted me, it could take me." Her words hung heavy between them. The fire popped. The mountain man finally spoke, his voice low, steady, but edged with something sharp. "They were wrong to do it." She blinked, as if unused to hearing such simple certainty. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she turned her face toward the fire, away from him, hiding whatever tears threatened. He let the silence hold. Let her breathe. Let her find her place again. At length, her head tipped back, eyes closing. The warmth of the fire and the broth in her belly dragged her toward sleep once more. The mountain man shifted his coat tighter over her shoulders. His gaze lingered on the marks at her throat, the hollow of her cheeks, the fragility in her form. He did not know what kind of folk had done this to her, but he knew this much. If they came looking to finish what they'd started, they would find her guarded now. The fire burned steady, and the storm had passed. Morning light crept through the pines, soft and grey, touching the edges of the clearing like a promise. The girl slept, at last safe in the warmth of the coat, while the mountain man kept watch, and in his silence, something unspoken shifted between them. By the second morning, the girl's breaths came easier. Her cheeks no longer bore the grey pallor of a dying ember, but carried a faint blush, like dawn creeping timidly over a frozen ridge. The broth had put weight back into her voice, and when the mountain man set a hand beneath her arm to help her sit upright, she managed it without collapsing. "You've got stubborn bones," he muttered, more approval than jest. Her lips curved faintly. "That's what my mother always said." The mountain man paused. It was the first time she had spoken of anyone beyond herself, the first thread that tied her to a life before the rain. "You've still folks waiting for you?" he asked carefully. Her gaze flickered, uncertain, and then lowered to the blanket wrapped around her knees. "Not anymore," she whispered. He said no more. Some answers only cut deeper if pressed. Instead he rose, moving about the camp with steady purpose. He broke down the lean-to, tied the wet canvas to his pack, and kicked apart the fire until it smouldered low, leaving little trace. He moved like a man accustomed to leaving no trail, careful, deliberate, eyes often sweeping the trees as if expecting something to step out of them. She watched him with quiet attention, her hands curled into the blanket. At last she said, "You've done this before. Saved people." He shook his head once, tightening the strap across his shoulder. "Mostly just save myself." This time's different. Why? She asked, her voice softer than the rain that had fallen days ago. He didn't answer right away. He studied the tree line, the way the morning light spilled pale through the mist, then looked back at her. Because you weren't meant to be left like that, not by any decent hand. She held his gaze, as if testing the weight of his words. Something in her, shoulders loosened, the faintest easing of the tension that had lived there since she awoke. With care, he helped her to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, bones and fabric more than flesh, but she stood. Her legs trembled, and she leaned against him, breath uneven. Slow now, he murmured. The mountain takes patience. They started down the slope. The trail was narrow, lined with wet pine needles and stones slick with moss. The forest seemed quieter than it had in days, but the quiet did not soothe. It pressed on them, heavy and watchful. Birds should have been singing after the storm, yet none called. The girl noticed it too. Her hand tightened faintly on his arm. It feels different. He gave a small nod, eyes sweeping the brush. Storms washed things clean, but sometimes storms stir up what should have stayed hid. They moved slowly, pausing often so she could catch her breath. At each stop he gave her water from his flask, steadying her hands when they shook. She took it with gratitude, though her eyes often flicked back along the trail they had come. "You think they'll follow?" she asked at last. He didn't soften the truth. "If they meant to leave you for dead, maybe they'll forget. But if they've got a taste for cruelty, sometimes it don't stop at once." She shivered, though not from the cold. "They called me cursed," she murmured. "Said the night itself would cling to me if I kept singing. Do you believe that?" His voice was firm, steady as stone. "No. What I believe is folk are quick to make devils where none stand, makes it easier to bury their own wrongs." Her eyes lingered on him then, and something like trust flickered through her weariness. By midday the sky broke open to patches of pale blue, and shafts of light spilled between the trees. The mountain seemed gentler under the sun, but the mountain man's guard never dropped. His hand often hovered near the rifle slung across his back. At one point, when the trail narrowed beside a small ravine, he paused, holding her steady while his gaze swept the ridgeline above. "What is it?" she whispered. He studied the ridge a moment longer before shaking his head. "Thought I saw movement. Might have just been the wind." But his tone held no comfort. They pressed on, step by careful step, until the shadows grew longer and the mountain began to hum with evening. The girl's strength faltered, and he knew they could go no farther that day. They stopped at a sheltered hollow beneath a cliff face, where the rock arched overhead to form a natural roof. He set her down gently on a flat stone, his eyes still scanning the woods. She leaned back, closing her eyes, exhaustion washing through her. "If they do come," she said, her voice fragile, "you'll leave me, won't you? To save yourself." The mountain man crouched before her, meeting her eyes square. His words came slow, deliberate. "No, I've seen enough folk left behind. I ain't in the business of leaving any more." Her breath caught, a sound somewhere between disbelief and relief. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her gaze softening in the fire's early glow as he struck flint to kindling. And as the fire sparked to life again, she whispered, almost to herself, "Then maybe I'm safe now." The mountain man said nothing, but his hand never strayed far from the rifle. He knew the woods were not done with them yet. The fire in the hollow burned low, its glow pressed close to the rock face to keep from spilling too far into the trees. The mountain man had stacked stones at the edge, dimming the light even more. He moved like a man who knew shadows were safer than flame. The girl sat wrapped in the blanket, knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes traced him in silence as he checked his rifle, refilled his powder horn, and laid his knife within easy reach. She noticed the small habits, the way he always faced outward, never turning his back to the woods, the way he paused oft, and listening longer than seemed natural. "Do you really think they'll come?" she asked at last, her voice low. "I don't think," he said, settling onto one knee. "I know." Her throat worked. "Then, how many?" He gave a slow shake of his head. Don't matter the number. Matters if we're ready. The wind slipped cold between the pines. Somewhere far down the slope, a branch cracked. Not the brittle snap of ice. No, this sound carried weight, deliberate and heavy. The mountain man's head lifted. His hand moved to the rifle, though he didn't rise. His eyes narrowed into the dark. The girl's breath stilled. What was that? Trouble keeping quiet, he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, for her, stay close to the stone. If I move, you don't make a sound. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, pressing herself tighter into the rock wall. The mountain man stood slow, deliberate, rifle balanced against his shoulder. He waited. The silence stretched, thick as tar. Another sound followed, this time not from below. From above, a scattering of gravel, as though a boot had slipped against rock. He turned his head just enough to catch her eyes. His mouth didn't move, but his stare told her everything. They were not alone. The girl's heart hammered so loud she was sure it would carry. Her hand clutched the blanket as though the wool could muffle the sound of fear. Minutes crawled by. The night seemed to breathe heavier, the trees leaning in, the air weighted with listening. Then came a voice, distant, too faint to make out the words but clear enough in its tone. A man's voice, rough and sharp, carried by the stillness. Another answered, closer. The girl stiffened, every muscle rigid. She turned her eyes to the mountain man, searching him for direction. But he didn't speak. He only watched the ridge above, his jaw set, his rifle steady. The voices faded, swallowed by the forest. Footsteps rustled against leaves, moving eastward along the slope. Then, silence again. Only after long moments did the mountain man lower the rifle. His shoulders eased slightly.